Thank you for coming to our paper on data silences. We know that the data in data science are imperfect. Almost 20 years ago, Bowker noted that raw data is an oxymoron and a bad idea. And so how can we make our data ready for analysis? We and others have shown in previous papers that data need a lot of work. We don't know what the data are until we define them. We need to interpret what they mean to us and to our audience or client. Through curation, we organize, classify, include, and exclude some data. As Melanie Feinberg has shown, we often need to design our data to make them fit for purpose. And in some cases, such as ground truth data, we need to create the data that we analyze. We turn to data wrangling for a collection of scientific methods for this data work. However, we discover that data wrangling is not simple. Data wrangling has many aspects that are more like skilled craftwork than simple science. Data depend upon the context in which they occur, and again on the context in which they are analyzed. They are embedded in human social activities. They are often redefined, reinterpreted by clients and others who are outside of the data wrangling process. Perhaps because of these complexities, as Simbasavan and colleagues noted, everyone wants to do the model work, not the data work. And yet, data work is important. Muller and colleagues argued for the importance of data work. Several groups have attempted to interrogate data science and data work. Through that careful interrogation, we want, as Parmigiani et al. Expressed it, to bring wrangling out of the back rooms of data science. To analyze data work, Strohmeyer and I used Anokwa's concept of data silences, the blank spots that stand out as gaps in otherwise data-saturated situations. We analyzed certain types of inadvertent silences that we impose on our data, such as substituting a trace for the actual data, distorting our view through hand-picked factors that make sense to us, and then assuming that what you see is all there is. And like good scientists in every discipline, we ignore distracting data to focus our attention on the current analysis task. Sometimes we use data silence as a form of care. We often try to de-identify data that could harm vulnerable populations. We're mindful that some data may be interpreted very differently depending upon discipline, perspective, or social position. We sometimes structure data so that they are legible to certain vulnerable people, even though more powerful and dangerous people cannot see what is in the data. And sometimes we aid people to control what the data says about them. But there are situations that are the opposite of care. Repressive silences can result if the database or dataset rejects certain data. A classic example is the rejection of gender identities that do not correspond to biological sex, or the rejection of intersectional cultural or racial identities. Our societies or our data repositories sometimes reject the testimonies of marginalized groups in favor of the perspective of powerful people. Sometimes we agree to forget certain types of data or never record them in the first place, a problem that is now being reluctantly addressed in relation to murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. We sometimes use data to humiliate vulnerable persons or nations. And we sometimes use the collection of data to intimidate people or groups that are at risk, to measure them into silence. Finally, we sometimes use data practices to erase persons, groups, or nations. Colonial unknowing is a long-standing practice of denying the reality of less powerful or subjugated peoples by arranging to unknow their data. Strohmeyer and I showed that data unknowing is a similar set of practices that erases data that could make us question our conclusions and then hides the evidence of that erasure by sanitizing the silenced places in the data. The data silences become a way of creating or reimposing ignorance. Proctor and Schiebinger defined the field of agnotology as the study of ignorance or doubt or uncertainty as something that is made, maintained, and manipulated by means of certain arts or sciences. And those arts and sciences, that's what we do. We'll quickly sketch one set of unknowing practices in data science. You can see on this slide a stack of activities that people typically carry out when they do data work and model work. Building up from the bottom, each layer obscures what was done in the layers beneath it. Each layer sanitizes the uncertainties that were created in the previous layer. In the end, we deploy the data science pipeline, and then there's a sound like the pulling up of window blinds, and we forget all of the uncertainties that we have covered over. We briefly remember that it was people who created the data, and then we forget the people, and all we have left is the data science pipeline, and it looks neutral, objective, and inevitable. Through the operation of many data silences, we have systematically forgotten all of the human information that could bring doubt on our pipeline and on its outcomes. We substitute the pipeline for all the flawed human work that produced it. We assume that what you see is all there is. And we impose silences on our data and on the people who are described by those data. We call for reforms of data work and data practices. First, we advocate that our data sets should contain their own human histories, their data provenance. Beyond the data in a data frame, we propose to add a data memory of what transformations we made, and we propose to add a social memory of who made those transformations and why they made them. In this way, we propose that any operation in data work should potentially be interrogable and potentially reversible and accountable. Second, we advocate for thinking about the people who do the data labeling or annotating, not as noisy sensors, but as expert and accountable humans, people like us. Third, we advocate that data science should be done in collaboration with the persons, groups, and nations who are affected by the data and the data science application. Action research and related methods provide multiple roadmaps for how this can be done. We argue that, as Indigenous and disabled groups have long demanded to participate in the co-governance of data projects that affect them, nothing about us without us. We invite you to investigate the bibliography of this brief paper for details and resources, and for your own work of reform. Thank you.